The early years of Pixar are home to some of the most acclaimed and fondly remembered films. The first two Toy Stories, Monsters, Inc., and A Bug's Life all came out in just a 6-year span, which seems insane when you think about how quickly these films became a part of pop culture. They created unforgettable stories, moments, heroes, and, of course, villains. From scary monsters to devious toys, just like the films themselves, their villains have become some of the most memorable in the studio's long and treasured history. But when you look at them through the lens of the judicial system, one has to wonder which of these villains would be getting off easy and which ones are definitely regretting their actions. Hey guys, I'm Brad with Wicked Binge, and this is Sentencing Pixar Villains for Their Crimes. Kicking things off is Pixar's very first film, Toy Story. First is the main antagonist, Sid Phillips. With Sid, we run into a bit of a problem right off the bat. While he certainly does bad things in the movie, everything he does is only done to toys. Of course, as far as the humans in this series and any other Pixar film are concerned, toys are just hunks of plastic. This then begs the question, should we look at Sid's crimes as though the toys are alive, or as inanimate objects? We thought about this a lot, but since the toys are portrayed to be just as alive as humans throughout the films, we have ultimately decided to try Sid as though his victims were human. In this context, Sid becomes a much more dangerous villain. There are still two angles to explore, his crimes and his motives, which sort of balance him out when it comes down to our sentencing. His creation of the mutant toys and later burning a hole in Woody's head would be enough grounds to earn him a torture charge. Don't forget that he literally blew up a Combat Carl figure, which makes this demented child the only villain on the docket today who has killed a character on screen. Him taping Buzz Lightyear to a rocket also makes him guilty of attempted murder. Let's not forget, Sid had no idea these toys were alive, so his motives were about as innocent as you can get, just a kid with a creative mind destroying toys. And he is a child, so this was a hard one. With all these crimes in mind, we think it's best if Sid receives 10 years probation with the requirement that he regularly sees a psychiatrist. And next, we're talking about Woody? Yeah, we know what a lot of you are thinking. How could Woody be on this list? He's the main hero. We don't disagree with your assessment, but when you remember what Woody was like in the first film and what his actions led to, it becomes a little harder to argue that he shouldn't be here. Remember, Woody knocked Buzz out the window, which we'll classify as assault. This is what caused him to end up in Sid's hands, leading to nearly both of them becoming fodder for Sid's strange experiments. Woody's frequent clashes with Buzz could also be added to the charge of assault, but it's not all bad. We also have to look at what good Woody has done. While he nearly doomed both himself and Buddy, he was able to overcome his issues with him and become his best friend, saving them both from Sid in the process.
Please. He's my friend.
In the sequels, Woody has helped friends both new and old, and it's clear that he is a toy with a huge heart. Thus, the only sentence we can reasonably argue Woody should endure is that of a pardoning. We think that between his reconciliation with Buzz and future adventures, Woody has more than proven that he's grown to be a better person than the jealous and mean-spirited toy of the first film. Needless to say, this sheriff won't be seeing the inside of a cell anytime soon. Alright, the next film is 1998's A Bug's Life. First is the main villain and the leader of the grasshoppers, Hopper. Hopper is a maniacal ruler. He believes himself to be ruler supreme and only sees ants as nuisances that can easily be eradicated.
Do I look stupid to you?
The first notable crime that Hopper commits is assault. He not only mercilessly attacks Flick, but he'll also beat his followers if he believes they're acting out of line. At the climax, he nearly kills Flick as well, which means we can add attempted murder to this list. Torture is another crime we see Hopper engage with. When Axel and Loco suggest that there isn't a point in going back to the ants, Hopper is quick to bury them underneath grain, which he then uses to make a point to the rest of the grasshoppers. However, Hopper's biggest offense is that he conspires to overthrow a government. His main goal is to get rid of the ants' queen, which he believes will give him complete and total control over the ant population. While the plan never comes to fruition, Hopper is a cunning and merciless villain. If it weren't for Flick's intervention, this plan would likely have become a reality. When looking at all these crimes in tandem, we think it's best if Hopper receives the death penalty, our first and only of this video. Being a dictator, his execution will befit a dictator. Hopper will be killed by public hanging. As one of the more ruthless villains of this era of Pixar movies, it's not too surprising that he gets the harshest punishment of them all. Next is Hopper's brother, Molt. His younger brother, to be more exact. Molt is the complete opposite of what his brother is. While Hopper is a master strategist and manipulator, Molt is easy to deceive and a fool. With that in mind, it should come as no surprise to hear that this is also true of the character's crimes. While Hopper had a bevy of different charges tied to his name, the only one we can truly hand out to Molt is aiding and abetting. He's involved in Hopper's plans to dominate the ants from the beginning to the very end. Even then, Molt is a lot less involved in the plan than a lot of his grasshopper brethren. He's often hesitant about Hopper's plans, and at the very end, he actually reforms and becomes a member of the circus. With that kind of growth, we believe the only punishment Molt needs is some community service. Since he still spends most of his time on the side of evil, we think a bit of punishment is necessary, but we also don't think the crimes he commits are worthy of an actual prison sentence. In the end, Molt gets off a lot easier than most villains on this list, and he's proof that it can be okay to be a bit different from your siblings. The last villain of A Bug's Life we'll be covering is Thumper. While Hopper's danger might come from his mind, Thumper is dangerous in a more physical sense. He only communicates through animal noises and is quick to attack anyone who dares cross him. Like Molt, he's guilty of aiding in Hopper's plans, but unlike Molt, he nearly murders several characters. He attacks Flick, but he seems primarily focused on taking out Dot, a young girl who's part of the Ant royal line of succession. This also means he's guilty of child endangerment in addition to attempted murder. Overall, we believe it's best for the insect community if Thumper receives a 20-year prison sentence. Thumper isn't as evil as Hopper, but he's still a danger to society. When you look at all of his crimes, you can't help but agree that this grasshopper needs some lengthy time behind bars. Now it's time for Toy Story 2. First is Stinky Pete. At first, Pete seems to be a polite and wise toy who's always willing to make new friends. By the end, however, that's revealed to be no more than a facade. Stinky Pete is actually a cruel and jealous man who wants nothing more than to control everyone.
It's too late, Woody. That silly Buzz Lightweight can't help you.
Compared to someone like Sid, his crimes are surprisingly short, although they're still rather notable. He attempts to kidnap Woody, coming close to ripping him to pieces. He's also guilty of assault when he attacks both him and Buzz seconds earlier. While these are only 2 crimes, the severity, as well as his manipulative nature, are enough to get him a prison sentence of 15 years. Stinky Pete wanted to be preserved and looked at for years to come. When you remember that aspect of his character, one can only hope that this achieves that wish for him, at least for a time. Next is Al McWiggin. He's the owner of Al's Toy Barn and has a large collection of Woody's Roundup memorabilia. Basically, Al takes Woody from a yard sale. This is an interesting crime because it once again feeds into the question of whether or not you look at the toys as humans.
On my way to the office to fax them to you.
If you do, then this would be kidnapping, but if you don't, then it's stealing. However, for the fun of the video, we'll decide to count both as crimes. Don't forget that Woody is essentially stuck underneath his watchful eye after he takes him, so from a point of view, he does kidnap and steal. However, Al doesn't have too many crimes beyond that. For that reason, we think Al should serve a maximum sentence of 5 years. Some may say it's a little lenient, others will say it's too harsh, but we think it fits Al just right. And he could always look on the bright side. Perhaps a certain stash of memorabilia could be just enough to bail him out. The last character from Toy Story 2 is Emperor Zurg. Zurg plays a small role in Toy Story 2, but it's easily one of the more memorable moments in the sequel. He is obsessed with destroying Buzz Lightyear, and he tracks him from Al's Toy Barn to his apartment, which we think is grounds to classify as stalking. We'll also add attempted murder, as he does come close to achieving his goal of destroying his nemesis. Luckily for Zurg, he seems to reform at the end, which we think lessens his crimes.
Good throw, son. That's my boy. Go long, buddy.
Regardless, Zurg's insatiable thirst for power is enough to get him 5 years in prison. Zurg might have turned a new leaf, but his crimes nearly derailed Buzz and his friend's quest to save Woody. So we believe some type of punishment is in order. Hopefully old Buzzy will visit him a few times though. And finally, the last movie of the day is Monsters, Inc. First, let's talk about Randall Boggs. Randall is a monster who can give even James P. Sullivan a run for his money. He plays a vital role in the movie as Sully and Mike's main nemesis. Of course, he's only really acting on behalf of his boss, Mr. Waternoose, which leads us to his first crime, aiding and abetting. Throughout their collaboration, however, he becomes guilty of a whole host of crimes. He both kidnaps and endangers Boo, on whom he plans on testing a dangerous device known as the Scream Extractor on. This device, which he attempts to use on Mike before he swaps places with Fungus, is so devastating that we think torture should be added to his offenses. Finally, he attempts to murder Sully and Mike during the climactic showdown. Randall couldn't be any more different from Sully, and nowhere is that more evident than in his criminal doings. You definitely couldn't see Sully torture or kidnapping anyone, could you? So with that out of the way, we're gonna go ahead and give Randall a life sentence. Randall's obsession with being the best and scariest monster creates nothing but trouble, and it's unlikely that he'll adapt to Monsters, Inc.'s new business model anytime soon.
Look at everybody's favorite scarer now!
This sentencing makes the most sense. At the very least, we think he'll prefer this over being stuck in that trailer, that's for sure. Last but not least is the puppet master behind the whole crisis, Henry J. Waternoose III. As we said before, Randall's actions were all done on the orders of Waternoose, which already gives this villain a harsher sentence than a lot of the other characters we have looked at today. However, Waternoose's offenses go deeper than just that. He was directly involved in Boo's kidnapping, and by his admission, he was willing to kidnap 1,000 children if it meant the company was healthy.
For the good of the company.
This attitude towards the children would also make him guilty of child endangerment. Lastly, it is important to note that only Waternoose himself, Randall, and a few others were even in on this evil plot. It's likely that Henry kept it a secret from other key figures in the company, which makes him guilty of conspiring. Given the type of crimes he commits, as well as how willing he seems to do them again, it seems most appropriate for Waternoose to also receive life in prison. The only thing that saves him from getting a sentencing as harsh as Randall's is that he isn't quite as active in the plot coming to fruition, opting more to handle things from behind the scenes. But whatever his role was, this is one monster that won't be scaring anyone for a long time. Alright, court is adjourned. Let us know in the comments section if you agree with our choices, and tell us what we should cover next. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge more of our videos. But most importantly, stay wicked.